My name is Emma Carter. The boardroom fell completely silent the moment I stepped through the glass doors. 16 executives turned toward me at the same time, their expensive suits shifting as they leaned back in their chairs. At the head of the long, polished table sat Richard Collins, Billionaire, founder and CEO of Collins Technologies, and the man who had fired me exactly 7 days ago. For a moment, no one spoke. I could see confusion on their faces, then irritation, then disbelief. Richard Collins narrowed his eyes, clearly trying to place where he had seen me before. Finally, recognition flashed across his face. His expression hardened. "What is this?" he said sharply. His voice echoed across the sleek conference room. "Who let the janitor into a board meeting?" A few people around the table chuckled quietly. One of the directors leaned toward another and whispered something that made them both smile. I didn't react. Instead, I walked calmly toward the empty chair at the far end of the table, the chair that had been prepared for the meeting's special guest. I placed a black folder on the table. Then I sat down. Richard Collins stared at me like I had just insulted the laws of physics. "You must be lost," he said coldly. "Cleaning staff use the service corridor." I folded my hands on the table. "I know exactly where I am," I replied calmly. That only seemed to irritate him more. "Security," he said, glancing at his assistant near the door. "Please remove her." Before anyone could move, I gently pushed the folder across the table. It slid smoothly along the polished surface until it stopped directly in front of him. "I suggest you read the first page before you do that, Mr. Collins." He looked at the folder, then at me, then back at the folder again. His patience was already thin, but curiosity won. He opened it. At first his expression was annoyed, then it froze. The color slowly drained from his face. He looked down again as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves. They didn't. Across the table, one of the board members leaned forward. "What is it?" he asked. Collins didn't answer. He just stared at the document. Finally, the director stood up and walked around the table. He glanced down at the paper. Then his eyes widened. "Wait," he said. The room grew quiet. "Is this—" Another director stood up. "Is that what I think it is?" The first man nodded slowly. His voice sounded almost stunned. "This says she owns 52% of Collins Technologies." The room exploded with noise. "What? That's impossible." "There must be some mistake." Richard Collins finally looked up at me. "You," he said slowly, "you clean floors in this building." "Yes," I said. "That is correct." "This document says you are the majority shareholder of my company." "Also correct." He slammed the folder shut. "This is some kind of joke." "No," I said calmly. "It's a business transaction." The directors began speaking all at once. How did this happen? When were these shares purchased? Why didn't the market react? I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them. A chart appeared. Hundreds of small stock purchases. Different funds, different companies, different investors, but all connected. "To answer your question," I said, "these acquisitions were made over the last 4 months." Richard Collins stared at the screen. "That's impossible," he said. "The regulatory filings would show it." "They do," I replied. "You just never noticed the pattern." He pushed his chair back violently and stood up. "You expect me to believe that a janitor somehow bought controlling interest in a multi-billion-dollar corporation?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," I said. "I only expect you to read the legal documentation." The company's chief legal officer, who had been flipping through the paper, suddenly spoke. His voice was careful. "Richard, the documents appear legitimate." The room fell quiet again. Collins turned toward him. "What did you say?" "I said," the lawyer repeated slowly, "these filings appear to be valid." Richard Collins looked back at me. For the first time since I entered the room, he didn't look angry. He looked unsettled. "How?" he asked quietly. "How did you do this?" I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Simple." I said. "I paid attention." Several directors exchanged confused looks. Richard crossed his arms. "You clean bathrooms and hallways," I said, "and conference rooms and executive offices." I met his gaze, which meant I was present for more meetings than most of your executives. The realization began spreading across the table. One of the older board members spoke carefully. "You're saying you've been observing the company from inside?" "For 3 years," I said. Richard let out a short laugh. "This is ridiculous." But there was no humor in it. You expect us to believe you planned this? No, I said. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I gently pushed another document across the table. I'm simply informing you. He hesitated, then opened the second folder. Inside was a formal notice. Board restructuring, executive removal, new ownership declaration. His eyes scanned the page, then stopped. His jaw tightened. You're removing me, said slowly as CEO. Yes. The word landed in the room like a dropped glass. One director whispered, Jesus. Richard Collins slowly looked up. You think you can run this company? I smiled slightly. I don't think. I know. And the truth was, this didn't start a week ago. It started 3 years earlier, long before I ever picked up a mop. 3 years earlier, my life looked very different. Back then, I wasn't a janitor. I was a graduate of one of the best business schools in the country, holding a master's degree in finance and strategic management. I had job offers from consulting firms, investment banks, even a venture capital firm in Boston. But none of those opportunities mattered to me. Because 3 years earlier, my father had lost everything. And the company responsible for that was Collins Technologies. My father, Daniel Carter, owned a small manufacturing business in Ohio. It wasn't a massive corporation, but it was honest work. For 25 years, he had built the company from nothing. He employed 50 people. Some of them had worked with him for decades. He paid fair wages. He took pride in every contract they won. To him, business wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was responsibility. Then Collins Technologies entered the market. At first, my father wasn't worried. Big corporations don't care about small companies like mine, he told me once while we were having dinner in the kitchen. They're chasing billion-dollar contracts. He was wrong. Very wrong. Collins Technologies didn't just compete. They crushed competition. Their strategy was simple. Buy the suppliers, undercut the prices, then wait. Smaller companies couldn't survive that kind of pressure. Within a year, several local businesses shut down. My father held out longer than most. But eventually the banks started calling. Loans were suddenly harder to renew. Contracts disappeared overnight. Even suppliers that had worked with him for years stopped answering his calls. Someone was buying them out. That someone was Collins Technologies. I remember the night everything collapsed. I walked into the kitchen and saw my father sitting at the table. The lights were off. Only the refrigerator light illuminated the room. He had a stack of papers in front of him. Bank statements, debt notices, legal letters. He looked up when he heard me. For the first time in my life, my father looked defeated. They don't even know who we are, he said quietly. I didn't understand. What do you mean? He gave a sad smile. To them, we're just numbers. He tapped the documents. A small competitor removed from the market. He leaned back in the chair. They'll never even realize they destroyed someone's life. 6 months later, my father died of a heart. The doctor said stress was a major factor. Maybe they were right. Maybe they weren't. But I knew one thing. Richard Collins never knew the damage his company caused. And he probably never cared. The day after the funeral, I made a decision. Not revenge. Revenge is emotional, temporary. I wanted something better. I wanted control. So I went back to school. For 2 years, I studied corporate finance, mergers, acquisitions, market behavior, and investment strategies. I graduated at the top of my class. Professors recommended me for high-paying positions, but instead of accepting those offers, I applied for a janitor position at Collins Technologies. The hiring manager looked confused when he read my resume. You're overqualified, he said. I smiled politely. I prefer practical work. He shrugged. We always need cleaning staff. 2 weeks later, I started working in the building. People think janitors are invisible. They're wrong. We're not invisible. We're ignored. And that is a very powerful position. Executives talk freely when they think no one important is around. They leave documents on desks. They argue in hallways. They forget that walls have ears and floors have people cleaning them. For the first 6 months, I didn't do anything. I simply observed. I learned the layout of the building. I learned the schedules of the executives. I learned which conference rooms were used for board meetings, which offices belonged to which executives. And most importantly, I learned how Richard Collins ran his company. The answer was simple: poorly. From the outside, Collins Technologies looked like a powerful empire, but from the inside, it was a mess. Departments fought each other for budgets. Executives made decisions based on ego rather than data. Millions of dollars were spent on projects that had no clear strategy. And Richard Collins encouraged it. He believed aggressive expansion was the key to dominance. But aggressive expansion without planning is just chaos. Within a year, I realized something very important. The company was strong, but the leadership was weak. Very weak. The first real opportunity came during a late evening meeting. I was cleaning the hallway outside the executive conference room. The door wasn't completely closed. Inside, Richard Collins and several board members were talking. At first, I ignored it, but then I heard something interesting. Share dilution, someone said. Another voice replied, investors are getting nervous. Collins laughed. They'll calm down when the next acquisition goes through. Another director spoke. We're already overleveraged. Collins dismissed him. That's what growth looks like. I slowly moved my cleaning cart closer to the door. Not enough to be suspicious, just enough to hear. For the next hour, they discussed company finances, stock performance, debt obligations, expansion risks. By the time the meeting ended, I understood something critical. Collins Technologies was vulnerable. Very vulnerable. And no one in that room seemed to realize it. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. For the next 6 hours, I analyzed every piece of public financial information available. Quarterly reports, market behavior, investor movements. And the more I studied, the clearer the picture became. The company's stock price was stable, but it shouldn't have been. Debt was rising. Investor confidence was weakening. And if the right investor began buying shares quietly, control of the company could shift. The idea sounded crazy at first. I was a janitor. Buying a corporation worth billions was impossible unless I didn't buy it alone. Unless I built something first. The next morning, phase 1 of my plan began. Phase 1 of my plan didn't involve buying stocks. Not yet. First, I needed capital. Real capital. The small inheritance my father left me wasn't enough to move markets. Even if I invested it perfectly, it wouldn't be anywhere near the amount needed to influence a corporation the size of Collins Technologies. So I started smaller. Much smaller. After my janitor shifts ended each evening, I went home and worked until 2 or 3 in the morning. I analyzed markets, technology startups, energy companies, logistics firms, any sector where small investments could grow quickly. For the first year, I focused on aggressive but calculated trades. I wasn't gambling. Every move was based on research. Every investment had a clear strategy. Slowly, the money began to grow. Then something interesting happened. One of my early investments, a small robotics startup, was suddenly acquired by a larger tech company. My initial investment multiplied 10 times. That was the moment everything changed. With that capital, I created a small investment firm. On paper, it looked like a standard private investment partnership. In reality, it had only one real long-term objective: acquire Collins Technologies. Of course, buying a company worth billions isn't something you do overnight. Even with growing capital, I needed allies, investors, funds, partners who were dissatisfied with the way Collins Technologies was being managed. And finding them turned out to be easier than I expected. Over the next 2 years, I quietly built relationships with investors who had lost confidence in Richard Collins. Some were hedge fund managers. Some were venture capitalists. Some were simply wealthy individuals who believed the company had enormous potential under different leadership. They all shared the same frustration. Collins Technologies was powerful, but it was being mismanaged. I never told them the full plan. Not at first. I simply offered them opportunities, smart investments, high returns, and gradually, trust. Once that trust existed, I presented the idea. Not revenge, not personal ambition, just a simple business proposal. Collins Technologies could be worth twice as much under competent leadership. Numbers convinced them, the data was undeniable, and eventually, they agreed. That was phase 2. Phase 3 began 4 months before the board meeting. That's when the stock purchases started. Not from one source. That would have been obvious. Instead, shares were acquired through multiple investment funds. Different companies, different countries. Each purchase was small enough not to trigger attention. But together, they formed a pattern no one inside Collins Technologies noticed. Except me, because I was the one building it. Every night after my lift, I reviewed purchase reports. Every week, the percentage grew. 2%, 5%, 11%, 17%. Then something unexpected happened. Richard Collins made a mistake. A big one. It happened exactly 1 week before the day he fired me. I was cleaning the executive floor when his office door opened. Collins walked out, speaking loudly on the phone. "I don't care what the analysts say," he was saying. "The acquisition will double our size." He stopped when he noticed the floor was wet. He looked at me with obvious annoyance. "You again," he muttered. I stepped aside. "Sorry, sir." He shook his head. "Cleaning should happen after hours." "Yes, sir." He looked down at the hallway, clearly irritated that he had to walk around the caution sign. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 3 years." He snorted. "Well, maybe you should learn to stay out of the way." He walked past me, then stopped, turned around, and said the words that accelerated my entire plan. "Actually, you know what? Go talk to HR." I looked up. "Sir?" "I'm tired of this," he said. "You people are always blocking the hallways. You people." He waved his hand dismissively. "Just go. You're done here." Then he walked away. An hour later, I was officially unemployed. When I stepped outside the glass tower of Collins Technologies for the last time as an employee, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because the final phase of my plan could begin. Up until that moment, I had to remain invisible. A janitor attracting attention would raise questions. But now it didn't matter. That night I called my investment partners. "We accelerate the acquisition," I told them. "How fast?" one of them asked. "As fast as possible." For the next 5 days, the purchases intensified. The final shares were secured through 3 international funds that were legally connected to my firm. On the 6th day, we crossed the threshold. 51% ownership. Control. And on the 7th day, I walked into the Collins Technologies boardroom. Richard Collins sat in silence for a long time after reading the documents. The other directors looked nervous. Finally, he spoke. "You planned this for years." "Yes." "You worked here as a janitor just to spy on the company." "Not spy," I said. "Observe." He stared at me. "You destroyed my career." I shook my head. "No. You destroyed it yourself." I pushed another folder across the table. Inside were financial reports, poor investments, failed expansions, millions of dollars wasted. "You built an empire," I said, "but you stopped listening." No one in the room argued. Because they knew it was true. Collins looked around the table. Several board members avoided eye contact. They had already chosen their side. Finally, he asked the only question left. "What happens now?" I stood up. The room became completely silent. "Now," I said calmly, "Collins Technologies becomes the company it should have been." I looked directly at him. "You can resign today with dignity, or the board will vote." He understood. Slowly, he picked up the pen, signed the resignation, and slid the document back across the table. Just like that. Richard Collins was no longer the CEO of Collins Technologies. Later that evening, I stood in the office that used to belong to him. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. For 3 years, I had cleaned this room, polished the desk, vacuumed the carpet, emptied the trash. Now it was mine. I walked to the desk and placed something on the shelf. My old janitor ID badge. A reminder. Because the truth about power is simple. People don't lose to their enemies. They lose to the people they underestimate. And sometimes, the person you ignore in the hallway is the one quietly buying your company.